Hi everyone, and welcome back to Home Cafe by Charlie. One of the most common questions I hear from people with home cafe gear is, how do I fix my espresso shots and make them taste better? So that's why in this video I'm going to walk you through my process for diagnosing bad espresso shots and improving them to get perfect balance. This is always going to be a process of trial and error, so I've made this flowchart to help you figure out which steps you need to take to stop getting bad tasting espresso and go from that to what baristas call a god shot. It's not easy, but man is it satisfying when you get everything perfect and you get to taste that manna from heaven. You can find the flowchart on our website at homecafeuk.com. First, let's talk about equipment. I'm going to be using my Rancilio Silvia and WPM grinder, which is a pretty decent combo for entry level or just above that. As you'll hear from a lot of coffee people, the grinder is actually more important than the espresso machine itself, so make sure you're investing enough money in getting a good grinder from the get-go. I skimped a little bit on my grinder in the first round and bought myself a Brazza Encore, which is a perfectly good grinder but gives you very limited steps to adjust for espresso. Once you get to know your grinder and your setup a little bit, you'll be able to adjust your grinder for a new coffee within a certain range. You'll need to do micro adjustments with every new coffee that you get because of all the different variables involved. So when people tell you to set your grinder to a certain setting, it's not going to work for every coffee and you'll end up getting some unpalatable coffees if you do that. Even if you buy the same brand of coffee every time, you'll still need to do micro adjustments because of things like the age of the coffee and even the humidity level in the air. Another piece of equipment that I use is my bottomless portafilter, which is really helpful for diagnosing shots and seeing where you might be going wrong. Now, you can do this perfectly fine with the standard portafilter that comes with your machine, but a bottomless portafilter really lets you diagnose what might be going wrong, whether there's channeling or whether you've improperly distributed in the portafilter. I'm almost done with the intro. Let's talk a little bit about tasting. You need to develop your palate so you can taste the difference between bitterness and sourness. They can be a little bit confusing and I've definitely gotten them mixed up in the past. One way you can develop this flavor is by going to extremes. So if you pull a shot and it comes out drip by drip, that's going to be under extracted. So try that coffee by the time it cuts to like 45 seconds and it's really just a little bit in the bottom. You can taste the bitterness in that cup. On the other side of that, if your shot is coming out way too fast and you're getting to your desired weight in 10 or 12 seconds, that is a really good one to try to test sourness, and your palate will start to adjust and understand the difference between bitterness and sourness. In short, bitterness is pungent and unpleasant, and sourness is really sharp and kind of makes you do that cringe thing. Okay, let's try this process from the ground up with a new coffee that I roasted recently. I'm switching coffees from a Guatemalan coffee that I've been drinking for a few days to a new blend of Costa Rican and Ethiopian Guji that has some really interesting and bold flavors listed by the importers. It lists flavors like blueberries from the Ethiopian and almonds and milk chocolate from the Costa Rican. So I really want to try and pull those flavors out of the coffee with a really great espresso. I haven't dialed this one in yet, so I'm going to show you how I adjust from the Guatemalan to the new Costa Rican and Ethiopian blend. On my WPM grinder, I usually start at around a 10 on the grind setting, and I adjust from 7 to 14 depending on the type of coffee. Roast level plays a really big role in this, and I usually find that darker roasted coffees can be ground a little bit coarser and lighter roasted coffees will be ground a little bit finer. The reason for this is that darker roasted coffees tend to have more oils on the surface of the bean, which help create more resistance for the water to push through. I use my Hario scale, which can adjust 0.1 of a gram, so I can get really precise about how much I dose. Okay, I'm going to start off at a 10 and see what this coffee tastes like. So the first shot is really sour, and if it's this bad, then what I want to do is I want to dial a lot finer, maybe 1 or 2 steps, because it came out in about 12 seconds and I want it to do about 25 seconds. So I'm going to dial it 2 points finer and see how that comes out next. I generally only dose for the amount of coffee that I'm doing, so I'll weigh the coffee before I put it in the grinder. Now be aware that many coffee grinders have a little bit of retention of old coffee grounds. So if it's the first coffee of the day or you haven't made a cup of coffee for a couple of hours, I would suggest grinding out a little bit of the coffee and tapping on the side of your grinder to make sure there's no coffee left over. There's nothing worse than ruining a good cup of coffee because there's a little bit, maybe half a gram or a gram of coffee left in the machine. Okay, so as you could see, this shot came out super slowly, and I'm really not expecting good things, but I'm gonna taste it anyway, just so you can enjoy my pain at trying this, what is gonna be a very, very bitter coffee. Oh, God. Okay, so the flavor in this is just completely bland. I mean, it's just bitter. It's just really, really bitter. It's not very nice. So I'm gonna try again. I went too many steps too fine, so I'm gonna go one step coarser, and hopefully that'll get a much better shot timing. This was my second try, and I only adjusted the grinder setting. I didn't change the dose of the coffee. Make sure that you don't get into the habit of changing the dose to correct the timings. The dose should only be to have more or less coffee coming out in the end. Okay, so this is the third shot, and it's got a much richer crema. It came out in 23 seconds for the right weight, and yeah, I'm excited to try this one because this one looks a lot thicker and creamier, a lot better, much better extraction than the previous ones. Oh, it's just a much better espresso than the previous two. The sourness and bitterness is gone. It tastes much better, much clearer. I can't taste the blueberry flavor I was hoping to get out of these Ethiopian beans, but since this coffee shot came out as well as it could have, I might have just needed to roast the coffee beans a little bit lighter to get those flavors. So yeah, but that's a pretty good espresso. Channeling is one of those issues that's really hard to diagnose, especially if you don't have a bottomless portafilter. If you do have a bottomless portafilter, you can often tell by seeing where does the coffee come out from and does it collect together into a single stream from the center. If you see the espresso coming out more from one side than the other, or much faster from one side than the other, that might indicate that that area of the coffee puck has lower resistance. Even if you don't have a bottomless portafilter, you can still often see channeling on a normal spout if you see the coffee coming out a lot faster after a long delay. So that long delay is where there's too much pressure and the water is trying to find a place to get through. In these cases, even if you've adjusted for this, you might find that you get the correct weight of coffee in the right amount of time, but it tastes really sour. For me, that usually indicates channeling. It sounds counterintuitive, but if you're getting this problem, try adjusting a little bit coarser, as this might help to reduce the amount of pressure and get a more uniform extraction. So that's it for diagnosing espresso. I really hope this video helped you. If you have any questions or comments or anything you want to know about diagnosing espresso shots, leave them in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you on the next one. Okay, why did I stop my video before I was ready? One take. Yeah, right.